Umavid Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. Today we're going to read chapter 2 of this book on great saviors of the world. And this one is a chapter on the general concept of saviors, sages, and spiritual teachers. And this is by Swami Abhedananada, who's one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who was actually here for the longest time of all the disciples, approaching about 20 years or more. The first section is Savior and Messenger of God. The avatars or Savior is the messenger of God. He is like the viceroy of a mighty monarch. When there is some disturbance in a far-off province, the king sends his viceroy to quell it. So, whenever there is a decline of religion in any part of the world, God sends his avatar there. It is one and the same avatar that, having plunged into the ocean of life, rise up in one place and is known as Krishna, and diving down again, rises in another place and is known as Christ. The avatars, like Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Christ, stand in relation to the absolute Brahman as the waves of the ocean are to the ocean. When Bhagavan Sri Ramachandra came to this world, 7 sages only could recognize him to be the God incarnate. So, when God descends into this world, few only can recognize his divine nature. None knoweth the immensity of the sacrifice which the Godhead maketh when it becomes incarnate in a human form. And of course we had that in the case of Sri Ramakrishna too. Not everybody recognized him to be a God incarnate. More than 7, but anyway, it wasn't everybody. Some people that saw him didn't actually recognize it, and it was probably even more so in the case of Holy Mother. It took quite a while for people to realize that she really was a divine incarnation in her own right. Redeeming power of saviors. In some seasons, water can be obtained from the great depths of the wells only, and with great difficulty. But when the country is flooded in the rainy season, water is obtained with ease everywhere. So, ordinarily, God is reached by saints with great pains through prayers and penances. But when the flood of incarnation descends, divine manifestation is seen anywhere and everywhere, and by his grace, everybody is saved. So that's certainly good news for all of us. As a large and powerful steamer moves swiftly over the water, towing along flats and barges in its wake, so when a Savior descends, he easily carries thousands across the ocean of Maya. The locomotive engine reaches the destination itself and also draws and takes with it a long train of loaded wagons. So likewise act the Saviors. They carry multitudes of men heavily laden with sin into the presence of the Almighty. On the tree of absolute existence, knowledge, bliss, there hang innumerable Ramas, Krishnas, Buddhas, Christs, etc., out of which 1 or 2 come down to this world now and then and produce mighty changes and revolutions. Think not that Sita, Rama, Sri Krishna, Radha, Arjuna, etc., were not historical personages, but mere allegories, or that the scriptures have an inner and esoteric meaning only. Nay, they were beings of flesh and blood, just as you are, but because they are the divinities, their lives can be interpreted both historically and spiritually. Yes, that's always an issue that we come across. Is sometimes the stories that we read about some of the incarnations, especially in the Puranic literature, seem so fantastic that we think, well, is it really, are these really historical figures? And we have to remember, though, that even in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, many very seemingly miraculous events occurred. And on the other hand, we also need to remember that people tend to elaborate things as the centuries go on. And when you're looking at Rama and Sita or Krishna and Radha, you're looking at several millennia of people being able to come up with more elaborate tales. In fact, of course, we have many versions of the Ramayana. And I remind people in the West that are familiar with Santa Claus as to what happened with Santa Claus. You see, we have a Saint Nicholas, and he's a historical figure, and he was a very saintly person. But he didn't ride in sleighs with reindeer through the sky and things like that. Those are all later sort of fanciful mythologizing, you could say. So sometimes there's some of that. So a story that's based on fact gets sort of mythologized and elaborated on and made more interesting and more provocative so people remember it. There is a fabled species of bird called Homa, which lives so high up in the heavens and so dearly love those regions that they never condescend to come down to the earth. Even when they lay eggs in the sky, laid in the sky, they begin to fall down to the earth, attracted by gravity. They are said to get hatched in the middle of their downward course and give birth to the young ones. The fledglings at once find out that they are falling down and immediately change their course and begin to fly upward toward their home, drawn thither by instinct. People such as Shukadeva, Narada, Jesus, Shankaracharya, and others are like those birds who, even in their boyhood, give up all attachments to the things of the world and betake themselves to the highest regions of true knowledge and divine light. As the elephant has two sets of teeth, the external tusks and the inner grinders, so the God-men like Sri Krishna and others act and live like ordinary men to the view of all, while their souls rest far beyond the pale of karma. And again, in the life of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, you find some incidences where they're acting as very ordinary people. Holy Mother was especially good at this. She came across as a very simple Hindu woman who was taking care of her duties. And many people would come to see her, and they saw really their own mother in her. She was so motherly and so kind that they just felt that they were in the presence of their own mother. And yet she would also, at times, people would have incredible spiritual experiences in her presence. And so going about all these ordinary things, cooking the meals and seeing devotees, seemingly a very ordinary person, and then at another time this incredible divine manifestation is unfolded. When Jesus was nailed on the cross, how was it that Jesus, in spite of so much pain and suffering, prayed that they should be forgiven? Answer: when an ordinary coconut is pierced through, the nail enters the kernel of the nut too. But in the case of the dry nut, the kernel becomes separated from the shell, and when the shell is pierced, the kernel is not touched. Jesus was like that dry coconut. That is, his inner soul was separated from his physical shell. Consequently, the suffering of the body did not affect him. Though the nails were driven through and through, he could pray with peace and tranquility for the good of his enemies. There are two sorts of men. The Guru said to one of his disciples, quote, What I impart to thee, my friend, is invaluable. Keep it to yourself, unquote. And the disciple kept it to himself. But when the Guru imparted that knowledge to another of his disciples, the latter, knowing its inestimable worth and not liking to enjoy it alone, stood upon a high place and began to declare the good tidings to all the people. The avatars are of the latter class, while the siddhas, perfected ones, are of the former. Of course, that's a famous story of Ramanuja. Ramanuja was said to do that when he received the highest spiritual instruction in a mantra, a special mantra. He declared it to everyone. So, when the flood comes, it inundates rivers and streams and makes one watery surface of all adjacent lands. But the rainwater flows away of itself through fixed channels. When a Savior incarnates, all are saved through his grace. The siddhas, perfected ones, only save themselves with much pain and penance. A siddha purusha, perfect man, is like an archaeologist who removes the dust and lays open an old well which has been covered up during ages of disuse by rank growth. The avatara, on the other hand, is like an engineer who sinks a new well in a place where there was no water before. Great men can give salvation to those only who have the water of piety hidden in themselves, but the saviors save those too whose heart is devoid of all love and dry as a desert. And of course, that's the importance of an avatar coming every once in a while, is that in different times and in different ages and different places, people need fresh, new instructions. Sometimes the old instructions are not necessarily as convenient or conducive or appropriate for current age. When a mighty raft of wood floats down a stream, it carries on hundreds and does not sink. A reed floating down may sink with the weight of even a crow. So when a Savior incarnates, innumerable are the men who find salvation by taking refuge under him. The siddha only saves himself with much toil and trouble. What is the state which a siddha attains? A perfect person and well-cooked food are both called siddha. There is a pun here in the word siddha. Answer: as potato or brinjal, when siddha, that is boiled properly, becomes soft and pulpy, so a man, when he becomes siddha, reaches perfection, is seen to be all humility and tenderness. Question: is it possible for a human soul to obtain the condition of absolute union with God when he is able to say Soham, he is I? If so, how? This is just like the case of an old servant of a house who, in course of time, comes to be counted as a member of the family. When the master of the house becomes very much pleased with the servant's work, he one day takes it into his fancy and gives him his own seat of honor, saying to all the members of the household, quote, henceforth there shall be no difference between him and me. He and I are one. Obey his commands as ye do mine. He who fails to do so and disobeys my orders will be punished for it, unquote. Even though the servant may hesitate through modesty to occupy the seat, yet the master compels him to take the seat of honor. Similarly, to this is the condition of souls who reach the state of Soham, he is I. When they serve the Lord for a long time, he graciously endows some of them with all his glory and attributes, and raises them to his own seat of universal sovereignty. Divine sages. The divine sages form, as it were, the inner circle of God's nearest relatives. They are like friends, companions, and kinsmen of God. Ordinary beings form the outer circle or are the creatures of God. The sage alone can recognize a sage. He who deals in cotton twists can alone tell of what number and quality a particular twist is. A sage was lying in a deep state of samadhi by a roadside. A thief passing by saw him and thought within himself, "This fellow lying here is a thief. He has been breaking into some houses by night and now sleeps exhausted. The police will very soon be here to catch him, so let me escape in time." Thus thinking, he ran away. Soon after, a drunkard came by and the sage upon the sage and said, "Hello, thou hast fallen into the ditch by taking a peg too much. I am steadier than thou, and am not going to tumble." Last of all, there came a sage. And understanding that a great sage was in samadhi, he sat down, touched him reverently, and began to rub gently his holy feet. Perfect man, unpolluted by the world. A perfect man is like a lotus leaf in the water, or like a mudfish in the marsh. Neither of these is polluted by the elements in which it lives. As an aquatic bird, such as a pelican, dives into water, but the water does not wet its plumage, so the emancipated soul lives in the world, but the world does not affect him. The swan can separate pure milk from water with which it has been mixed. It drinks only the milk, leaving the water untouched. Other birds cannot do so. So God is intimately mixed up with Maya. Ordinary men cannot see him separated from Maya. Only the Paramahamsas of egoism. Some great souls who have reached the seventh or the highest plane of samadhi and have thus become merged in God consciousness are pleased to come down from the spiritual height for the good of mankind. They keep the ego of knowledge, the aham of vidya, or in other words, the ego of the servant, or the ego of the devotee. Shankaracharya kept the ego of vidya, knowledge, for the teaching of others. The master's talk with the disciple went like this: "Master, have I any abhimana, egoism?" Disciple: "Yes, a little, and that little has been kept with a view to the following objects. First, the preservation of the body. Second, the culture of bhakti or devotion to God. And third, the desire to mix in the company of the bhaktas, devotees. Fourth, the desire to give instructions to all. At the same time, it must be said that you have kept it only after a good deal of prayer. My idea is that natural state of your soul is capable of being described only by the word samadhi. Hence I say that the abhimana or egoism that you possess is the result of prayer." Master: Yes, but it is not I that have kept it, this self, but it is my divine mother. It lies with my divine mother to grant the prayer. Hanuman was blessed with the vision of God, both sakara and nirakara, with form and without form. But he retained the ego of the servant of God. Such was also the case with Narada, Shankara, Sananda, and Sanat Kumara. Here the question was asked if Narada and others were bhaktas only and not jnanis too. And Sri Ramakrishna replied, Narada and others had attained the highest knowledge from a jnana, but still they went on like the murmuring water of the rivulet, talking and singing. This shows that they too kept the ego of knowledge, a slight trace of individuality to mark their separate existence from the deity, for the purpose of teaching others. the sayings of truth of religion. As a rope that is burnt retains its form intact, but being all ash, nothing can be bound with it, so the man who is emancipated retains merely the form of the egoism, but no idea of self, ahankara. And of course, we've probably all seen something that's burnt and the shape is still there, even though it's not, the object's not really there. It's just the ashes. And then, of course, if you blow on it, it just goes away. There isn't anything there. So it's completely unsubstantial, but there's an appearance until it's disturbed that it's still there. When the head of a goat is severed from its body, the trunk moves about for some time, still showing the signs of life. Similarly, though the ahankara, egoism, is beheaded in the perfect man, yet sufficient of its vitality is left to make such a man carry on the functions of physical life. But that much is not sufficient to bind him again to the world. Ornaments cannot be made of pure gold. Some alloy must be mixed with it. A person totally devoid of Maya will not survive more than 21 days. So long as the person has a body, that person must have some Maya, however small it may be, to carry on the functions of the body. The wind carries the odor of the sandalwood as well as that of ordure, which I'm assuming is something that doesn't smell good, but does not mix with either. The emancipated soul, in the same way, lives in the world but does not mix with it. Section on preaching of perfected ones. When a fire burns, the moths come, but knows not whence, and they fall into it and die. The fire is not seen to invite the moth to its fate. Similarly to this is the preaching of the perfected ones. They do not go about calling others, but hundreds come to them of their own accord. No one knows whence, to get instructions from them. Hast thou got, O preacher, the badge of authority? As the humblest servant of the king, authorized by him, is heard with respect and awe, and can quell the riots by showing his badge, so must thou, O preacher, obtain first the order and inspiration from God. So long as thou hast not this badge of divine inspiration, thou mayest preach all thy life, but only in vain. What is true preaching like? Instead of preaching to others, if one worships God all that time, there is enough preaching. That is enough preaching. He who strives to make himself free is the real preacher. Hundreds come from all sides, no one knows whence, to him who is free, and are taught by him. When a rosebud blooms, the bees come from all sides, uninvited and unasked. Throw an unbaked cake of flour into hot ghee. It makes a sort of bubbling noise. But the more it is fried, the less becomes the noise. And when it is fully fried, the bubbling ceases altogether. So long as a person has little knowledge, that person goes about lecturing and preaching. But when the perfection of knowledge is obtained, then ceases the person ceases to make vain displays. As many have heard of snow but not seen it, so many are the religious preachers who have read only in the books about the attributes of God, but have not realized them in their lives. And as many have seen but not tasted it, so many are the religious teachers who have not got a glimpse of divine glory, but have not understood its real essence. But have got only a glimpse of the divine glory, but not understood its real essence. He who has only tasted the snow can say what it is like. Similarly, he alone can describe the attributes of God who has associated with him in his different aspects, now as a servant of God, then as a friend of God, then as a lover of God, or as being absorbed in him. The light of the gas lamp illumines various localities with varying intensities, but the life of the light, namely the gas, comes from one common reservoir. So the religious teachers of all ages and climes are but so many lamp posts through which it is emitted the light of the Spirit flowing constantly from the Almighty Source. As the rain water falling upon the roof of a house flows down to the ground through pipes having their mouthpieces shaped like the head of a tiger or a bull, and appears to come out of the tiger's mouth or the bull's mouth, but in reality it descends from the sky. Even so, the eternal truths that come out of the mouths of godly men are not uttered by those men themselves, but in reality they descend from the kingdom of heaven. And so that's sort of the essence of our interfaith teachings, is that all of these great spiritual teachers are speaking from that source of divine inspiration, but it comes out differently depending on the times and the places where they're teaching and their own personal experience. They're still coming through a particular person and a particular body when they had to take on that certain bit of Maya in order to have a body, and so that colors the way their teachings come through. What is the reason that a prophet is not honored by his own kinsmen? The kinsmen of a juggler do not crowd around him to see his performances, while strangers stand agape at his wonderful tricks. There is always a shadow under the lamp, while its light illuminates the surrounding objects. So the men in the immediate proximity of a prophet do not understand him. Those who live far off are charmed in his spirit and extraordinary power. And again, we find that too in the lives of Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and so forth. There are sometimes certain members of their immediate family really didn't recognize. I mean, they just saw them as parts of their immediate family. So it's hard for them to get a different perspective. Just as, I mean, we often run know people in a particular light, perhaps a professional light, but to somebody at their home, they're the dad or the husband or the mom or the wife. So our perspectives are different depending on our relationship. The divine power must be understood to be in greater quantity in those who are honored, respected, and obeyed by a large followers. That doesn't make any sense. Large group of followers. Then that is those who have no such influence. Good and holy sadhus alone reflect divine light. The sunlight is one with the same wherever it falls, but only bright surfaces like water, mirror, and polished metals can reflect it fully. So is the divine light. It falls equally and impartially on all hearts, but only the pure and clean hearts of the good and holy sadhus can fully reflect it. He alone is the real person who is illumined by the light of true knowledge. Others are people in name only. The knowledge which purifies the intellect is true knowledge. Everything else is non-knowledge. Society of the Pious. The companionship of the holy and the wise is one of the main elements of spiritual progress. The society of pious men is like the water in which rice is washed. The rice water dissipates intoxication. So doth the society of the pious relieve worldly men intoxicated with the wine of desire from their intoxication. How should one pass one's life? As the fire on the hearth is stirred from time to time with a poker to make it burn brightly and prevent it from going out, so the mind should be invigorated occasionally by the society of the pious. And of course, that's why we have so many classes for people to come and attend, is that we have to, that's like stoking the fire. We're constantly reminding ourselves of the spiritual principles that we're supposed to be following. Otherwise, just an ordinary living, we're just exposed to so much other stuff. It tends to, we tend to forget the spiritual dimension of our life. The agent of a rich zemindar, when he goes into the mufuzal or interior, tyrannizes the tenants in various ways. But when he comes back to the headquarters under the eyes of the master, he changes his ways, becoming very pious. He treats the tenants kindly, investigates all their grievances fully, and tries to mete out impartial justice to all. The tyrannical agent becomes good through the fear of the landlord and by the effect of his society. Similarly doth the society of the pious make even the wicked righteous, awakening awe and reverence within them. So that's the advantage again of holy company. It brings out our good tendencies rather than our bad tendencies. So that's the whole idea of holy company, is you want to be around people with like mind, like spiritual mind, rather than having your mind dragged down. Otherwise, there's always a tendency to kind of try to fit in with whatever crowd you're in. This can be especially challenging for young people going off to college. That's why we encourage them to join their spiritual groups. I work at USC, and we've got 80-some spiritual groups. But it's getting harder and harder to convince them that they need the companion of their fellow like-minded spiritual students. But that's really very important. And that we find the same thing in just our ordinary lives. If we have to work outside, and you've got co-workers, and they're apt to just talk about all sorts of ordinary stuff. It's often a moisture of greed. I think holy company is probably a little better than pious, but sometimes that has a slightly negative connotation as being overly sanctimonious. But here, it really, the translation of the word isn't probably the best in current context. So it drives away the moisture of greed and lust from the hearts of worldly men and women, and then the fire of viveka, discrimination, burns within them. As the blacksmith keeps alive the fire of his furnace by occasionally blowing of its bellows, so the mind should be kept burning by the society of the holy. Guru or spiritual teacher. If thou art in right earnest to be the good and perfect, God will send the proper master, Sadguru, to thee. Earnestness is the only thing necessary. So long as the mind is unsteady and fickle, it avails nothing, even though a man has got a good and perfect guru and the company of holy men. And of course, that's why meditation is important. That's training the mind to be more steady and not be fickle. We have to, just like anything else, a disciplined mind is something you have to practice, just like you have to practice a musical instrument or you have to practice a sport. You have to practice disciplining the mind. And meditation is the highest practice in disciplining the mind. But all the yogas do that. I mean, you're disciplining the mind with karma yoga, with jnana yoga, and with bhakti yoga, just in different ways. The fabled pearl oyster leaves its bed at the bottom of the sea and comes up to the surface to catch the rainwater when the star Swati is in ascendance. It floats about on the surface of the water with its shell wide open until it succeeds in catching a drop of the marvelous Swati rain. Then it dives down to its seabed and there rests until it has succeeded in fashioning a beautiful pearl out of that raindrop. Similarly, there are some true and eager aspirants who travel from place to place in search of that watchword from a godly and perfect preceptor, which will open to them the gate of eternal bliss. And if in their diligent search one is fortunate enough to meet such a guru and get from him the much longed for logos, which is sure to break down all fetters, he at once retires from society and enters into the deep recess of his own heart and rests there until he succeeds in gaining eternal peace. So if you've been initiated and you have a mantra, that is your Swati drop that's quietly working its power inside you to create that pearl of great price. The man guru whispers the sacred formula into the ear. The Siddha guru breathes the spirit into the soul. The human guru mantra to ear doth impart. This is a quote from the Manusha guru. Let's see. Oh no, this is just a footnote. Okay. All right. The guru is a mediator. He brings people and God together. What is the necessity of calling a particular guru instead of everyone who teaches us something? When going to a strange country, one must abide by the directions of the guide who knows the way, while acting upon the advice of many may lead to confusion. So in trying to reach God, one must follow implicitly the advice of the one single guru who knows the way to God. Whoever can call the Almighty with sincerity and intense earnestness of God needs no guru, but such a deep yearning of the soul is very rare. Hence the necessity of the guru. The guru is only one, but upagurus may be many. He is an upaguru from whom anything whatsoever is learned. The great Avadutta had 24 such upagurus. So, even though we have one guru, we might have many upagurus or adjunct gurus. And of course, many times, for many people, their original initiating guru has passed on. And so then, of course, advice can be gained from other upagurus. He who thinks his spiritual guide or guru to be a mere man cannot derive any benefit from him. And that's why we always think of the lineage and the link, and the power that's coming through the guru is coming directly from the avatar source and beyond. Disciple must not criticize the guru. The disciple should never criticize his guru. He must implicitly obey whatever the guru says. There runs a Bengali couplet. Though my guru may visit tavern and still, my guru is holy, Rai Nityananda still. And another way of translating that is, though my guru may visit the unholy rendezvous of drunkenness and sinners, still to me he is my own pure and faultless guru. Take the pearl and throw the oyster shell away. Follow the mantram, sacred word given by the Guru, and throw out of consideration the human frailties of the teacher. Listen not if anyone criticizes and censures the Guru. Leave his presence at once. He who considers his Guru to be human, what fruit can he get from his prayers and devotion? We should not consider our Gurus to be mere men. Before the disciple sees the deity, he sees the Guru in the first vision of divine illumination. And it is the Siddha Guru who afterwards shows the deity, being mysteriously transformed in the form of the deity. Then the disciple sees the Guru and the deity to be one and the same. Whatever boon the disciple asks, the deified Guru gives him that. Yes, the Guru even takes him to the highest bliss, nirvana. Or the man may choose to remain in a state of duality, maintaining the relation of a worshipper and the worship. Whatever he asks, his Guru vouchsafes him that. Guru facilitates spiritual progress. In a play of dice called Ashta Kashta, the pieces must pass through all the squares of the checkerboard before they reach the central square of rest and non-return. But so long as a pawn does not reach that square, it is liable to return again and again to its starting point and commence its weary journey many times over. If, however, two pawns happen to start their journey in unison and move jointly from square, they cannot be forced back by any winner. Similarly, in the world, those who start in their career by devotional practices, first uniting themselves with their Guru and Ishta, chosen ideal, need fear no reverses and difficulties, and their progress will be smooth, unimpeded, and without any retrogression. Don't know that game, so I don't know exactly how it's played, but it sounds interesting. We'll have to look it up. There's no translation as to what game that is. In mid-ocean, a bird which has found its perch upon the mast top of a ship, getting tired of its position, flies away to discover a new place of rest for itself, and alas, without finding any, returns at last to its old roost upon the masthead, weary and exhausted. So when an ordinary aspirant, being disgusted with the monotony of the task and the discipline imposed upon him by his well-wishing and thoroughly experienced Guru, loses all hope, and having no confidence in him, launches forth into the broad world, over in search of a new guide, he is sure to return at last to his original master after fruitless search, which has, however, increased the reverence of the repentant aspirant for his own Guru. I don't know why, but that somehow reminds me of an old movie called The Miracle. The situation's not quite the same, but it was a nun who got tired of being in the nunnery and wanted to find a boyfriend. So she escaped the convent and went through several falling in loves, each of which ended in disaster. Mostly the guy died or left her or something, over and over, about several times. So she finally went back to the convent in hopes they would take her back. And the miracle was that they didn't know she had left. The Virgin Mary had taken her place. You remember that movie?
I think so.
Yeah. Gurus, spiritual teachers, can be had by hundreds of thousands, but a good chela disciple is very rare. is one ancient saying. It means that many are the persons who can give good advice, but they who follow it are few. Remember, Alice in Wonderland said she often gave herself very good advice, but rarely followed it. Many of us are in that situation. Who can be another's guru? God alone is the guru and the master of the universe. Sannyasins. Who is the fit candidate for the holy order of sannyasins? He who gives up the world altogether without taking thought for the morrow as to what he shall eat or wherewithal he shall be clothed is a true sannyasin. He is like a man who climbs over the top of a high tree and lets himself fall from that eminence without any thought of saving his life and limbs. The yogis and sannyasins are like snakes. The snake never digs a hole for itself, but it lives in the hole made by the mouse. When one hole becomes uninhabitable, it enters into another hole. So the yogis and sannyasins make no houses for themselves. They pass their days in other people's houses, today in one house, tomorrow in another. A sage and a god should never be visited empty-handed. However trifling the present may be, one should never fail to place something before the great ones. Well, we have a little more time, so I could continue into the next section a little bit. All the sections aren't all that different. These are sayings of Sri Ramakrishna about spiritual life that Swami Abhedananada remembered from his own personal recollection. Every person should follow his own religion. A Christian should follow Christianity. A Muslim should follow Islam, and so on. For the Hindus, the ancient path, the path of the Aryans, Rishi, is the best. People partition off their lands by means of boundaries, but no one can partition off the all-embracing sky overhead. The invisible sky surrounds all and includes all. So a common man is ignorant, in ignorance says, "My religion is the only one, my religion is the best." But when his heart is illumined by true knowledge, he knows that above all these wars of sects and sectarians presides the one individual, eternal, all-knowing bliss. As a mother in nursing her sick children gives rice and curry to one, and sago and arrowroot to another, and bread and butter to a third, so the Lord has laid out different paths for different people suitable to their natures. A truly religious person should think that other religions are also paths leading to the truth. We should always maintain an attitude of respect towards religions. We were talking again among the religious directors at USC, and we used to have orientation sessions where 2 or 3 directors would be behind a table like this with the literature from all the different groups, and we would take turns. There would be like 10 orientation sessions over the summer, and so you'd sign up and you'd go for maybe 2 of them during the session. So nobody was there for all of them. But we all promoted everybody else's group, and I thought it was a very good interfaith statement. And somehow that kind of orientation doesn't happen anymore. They've changed their whole system of how the students are oriented. And with the pandemic, of course, there isn't any of this in-person stuff that's going on. So we were just mentioning that was one thing that was kind of lacking these days. But of course, the online stuff has its own advantages. You can have people see things at any time and any place. They don't have to be physically in a particular place at a particular time, but actually motivating people to go out and look for that is somewhat challenging. So it's a difficult situation at the university levels where the students are not able to have an in-person contact with other people from their particular tradition. Makes it a little bit more difficult. And they were telling us we have to be prepared that at USC next year, assuming that we are having in-person classes, we will have the equivalent of 20,000 freshmen, in the sense that none of them have had a campus experience. Half of the student population at USC and other universities like it will have not had an on-campus experience. So they are fresh in that sense. And some of them, it's going to be, people have been at home isolated for so long. And I've heard this too about some of the public schools. Some of the students are going to feel awkward going back to school. It's going to be like being a kindergarten student. You don't know. Gee, the big old scary school. I have to go to school, and I won't be at home with mom and dad and my brothers and sisters, and with all these strangers that I don't know. So it's going to be, it's welcome by some of them that they're going to be able to have their sports teams and their choirs and their orchestras and bands and their clubs and so forth, and some personal contact with teachers. But it's also going to be very challenging psychologically to people that aren't used to being in big groups anymore. I think that'll be even more challenging for the younger ones that they don't have as big a life spread. If you've already lived for 20 years and you're having a variety of experiences, it won't be as difficult. But if you maybe had 1 year of school and then ended up at home, I think it's going to be a little more difficult for them. And of course, again, we also have this this interfaith aspect that's so important, and also just interracial and ethnic and so forth. All of these different things are important to acculturate people. And people that are used to being with diversity don't have as much problem. People that come from areas of the country or other countries where there isn't any diversity to begin with, that's a whole new experience for them. To suddenly come to a university that's got people from all over the world. They all look different. They've got different faiths. They have different accents, different customs, different food tastes, and so forth. So, and it's important, just as it is important to remember to have interfaith tolerance. You have to be tolerant of other cultures. And tolerance is not really the best word. It's more of an interest, really. Rather than being scared of differences in diversity, we have to think, oh, that can be interesting. I should probably get to know these people. Maybe I can learn something from them. Maybe they've got some things that be interesting to me. Then maybe not. But anyway, it's the way they are. And so let's get to know each other so we can share ideas and experiences and enrich our lives, rather than just keeping ourselves kind of closed off in our own little narrow viewpoint that might feel comfortable, but it isn't very expanding. It doesn't let you grow in ways that you could grow by taking advantage of learning about other people and other cultures. That's why people like to travel. And so in Los Angeles, you don't have to travel very far to learn about other cultures. So that's probably enough for tonight. We'll go ahead and close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace. Yeah, it just occurred to me the other day that these, I work primarily with Hindu students that just came over from India, and at least when I went to India, there was no diversity. They were all Indian, and
I know.
yeah, and I forget that